Planned Parenthood is blaming the, quote, hateful speech of conservative lawmakers and Republican presidential candidates for provoking Friday's deadly shooting at a Colorado clinic. They released a statement saying, "We are grateful for the enormous outpouring of support from people all across the country who are appalled by this act of violence and want to see an end to the hateful rhetoric that fueled it." But conservatives said the left is trying to use the tragedy for political gain and are dismissing the link to anti-abortion rhetoric.
Well, I think there has been some vicious rhetoric on the left, blaming those who are pro-life. This murder that occurred in Colorado is tragic. It is a criminal act. We don't fully know the motivations of this deranged individual. We know that he was a man who registered to vote as a woman. You know, the media promptly wants to blame him on the pro-life movement when, at this point, there's very little evidence to indicate that.
It's so typical of the left to immediately begin demonizing a messenger because they don't agree with the message. The vast majority of Americans agree. What Planned Parenthood is doing is wrong, and that's why the vast majority of Americans are prepared not only to defund Planned Parenthood, but also to stop abortion for any reason at all after 5 months. So what I would say to anyone who tries to link this terrible tragedy to anyone who opposes abortion or opposes the sale of body parts is this is typical left-wing tactics.
Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett is with us now from Washington. Major, what do you make of Ted Cruz's and Carly Fiorina's comments?
Well, look, we ought to be able to, in the media and in the political conversation, separate two things out that are happening simultaneously or that happened in rough approximation to one another. There was a controversy this summer sparked by some videos that were obtained by a group that is against the abortion movement generally and was against Planned Parenthood's practices specifically, taping people who work for Planned Parenthood, describing methods by which some of the body parts taken from abortions were then later sold for fetal research. Planned Parenthood has changed its tactics after that, and that generated a debate about this practice and what Planned Parenthood did or did not do in concert with what people thought it was doing in its practices, what was the federal law, and all sorts of other various issues. And you have this Colorado Springs shooting. There is one statement from the alleged gunman saying no more body parts. We don't know anything else about his genuine motivation. We know from a New York Times profile that his ex-wife said he thought he was against abortion, but it wasn't a huge topic of conversation. So conjoining these two things, I think, is part of a political conversation, but not necessarily relevant to the underlying facts of the case. We don't know everything yet. Ted Cruz and Carly Fiorina don't want to have this debate over the pro-life cause generally or Planned Parenthood and their advocacy against it, tarred and tarnished by this massacre in Colorado Springs, and are going to deflect every opportunity, will try to deflect at every opportunity any attempt to link them together. Planned Parenthood obviously feels under siege, not just metaphorically, but after this episode, literally, because of the debate generated by some of its own practices and what it has had to acknowledge about some of them and had to change about some of them. But one thing that happens quite often in this country when abortion rights and gun rights clash with each other, either just in general terms or after a tragedy like this, the politics become very, very heated. Planned Parenthood has an agenda. Ted Cruz and Carly Fiorina have an agenda. What I found as interesting about all this is, in some cases, the relative silence of some Republicans on this matter across the board, like Marco Rubio, for example, hasn't said much at all. Some Republicans running for the presidency and the nomination are trying to, if not avoid this topic, say as little about it as possible.